Yes, and in fact, Dan Katz, I have to give a shout out to Dan Katz, who was a student of my husband's. I met him as an undergraduate, who's now really one of the leaders on reinvent law and the reinvent law laboratory at Michigan State. But one of my favorite presentations is he has, and it's under his computational legal services blog, is called the MIT School of Law.
Exactly. So that is a perfect segue, and he's someone that we definitely track, as it were, but by RSS feed, not by surveillance from the satellite. And so what we call, so Lena, who's a Harvard Law student, and I'm Dazza Greenwood, scientist in the MIT Media Lab's Human Dynamics group, a big data group basically, and I'm a former lawyer. What we do is, it's called computational social science.
Yes.
And our method is like that, what you referenced, but we're calling it computational legal science, similar to legal studies, but we're literally doing research-based studies, and we do an awful lot with a lot of personal informatics in other realms, with economics and sociology and so forth, where we get tons of phone data, tons of social network data, and a bunch of other data to create models that are very, very insightful. So now, as we've got a legal team together in the research group under Sandy Pentland, we're looking very, very seriously at justice statistics, and of course, there's so much in contracts and in privacy and other areas of law, but in justice, in reviewing the Bureau of Justice Statistics data that they have, and taking a look at the U.S. State Sentencing Commission data sets as well, which are good, and just thinking back to my own days when I was a government lawyer for a while and had done some prison systems and a few other things through procurement and IT. It struck me when you were speaking that we need the data and we need an app that's actionable. That you're right on the money, but I don't.
An app, yes.
Exactly, but I wanted just to ask you to talk a little bit about what seems to us, we're reasonably well-informed people, but it seemed like such a tangled mess right now. We weren't sure where to start. The data's not well normalized at the different. It's patchy. It's it's not kept evenly. And then when you look to what we could reasonably get for analytics, much less an app, we're not sure what we felt. We'd like to hear you talk about where we should begin.
So, again, the stars align, and I would tell you, let me line down the players. Nancy Gertner, who left the federal bench in Boston and is now running the Legal Institute at Harvard, I presented in her sentencing class, is really a leader in all these fields, and I really admire her. Leo Sorokin, who is the magistrate judge, senior magistrate judge on Boston, has now been nominated to be in Article 3. And with me, there's a whole group of us, but he started his program. They call it, it's a CARES program. Everybody names theirs differently. So he's a leader, and he's in Boston. So those are two. Mark Sherman, who's at the Federal Judicial Center, is the keeper of all of this, lawyer, trainer of all the judges and probation officers. I would tell you Charles Samuels, right now, the director of the Bureau of Prisons, cares about this, a program guy, and will work with us. So you would build a team to look at the data, because when we first, if you went on the District of Oregon website under probation, what we did, which I have to say, looking back, I couldn't believe we did it, to put a program up in the federal system when they didn't do it, is the team of us read 4 bodies of literature. We went back to those core components that needed to be in place. And it's using what I would call the Kennedy School of Government. That is, you take the best practices, you put it up, and then you fine-tune it. And that's their model of public policy. So we did that. And then we continued to fine-tune it. But we didn't even keep the data in probation back then. Right. So we had to go through files to try to even have a comparable group. So I know the data problem is really hard. That's why if we started with this population where we get the intense data and build back. So now we have what's called the PACT system in the probation office. So we're starting to keep that data, and we're now in a program improvement model, and we are looking at how we're going to track that data better for just the courts. Then there's the prisons, and then there's sentencing. So I would tell you that we all work better in teams.
Yes.
Across jurisdictions, multidisciplined approaches, and that we could throw a lot of folks your way, including a third-year law student named Nick Meyer at Harvard, who's going to come back, and clerk at U.S. District Court for Oregon for Judge Simon, also a Harvard grad. So we are a little Oregon. We're sending people back to the big city to learn some of this stuff and bring it back to the to the ranch.
Yeah.
And,
well, obviously you have a lot to teach us.
No, but we have a lot. We're small enough we can do some of these models.
Yeah.
But there's some great people around the country, and I could shout out to so many different folks in different districts. So it just is a question of what do you think would be a good team, and we can do conference calling and make some things happen?
Thank you. And then in closing, I just encourage you to say, in terms of day forward, looking at all the data in the past in the systems, that's a tangle. Take a look at fun. If we don't talk again for some reason, it's the network that gets ridiculously deep data on mobile phones that we use for other social science, all the sensors on smartphones. And from it, we're able to discover who's likely to have depression, post-traumatic stress syndrome as part of a vets returning from the war, advanced system. It may be the metadata from these apps, if you use these types of sensor arrays, could be even more predictive of when someone that's trying to rehabilitate is in trouble or what the patterns are. So if we don't look at FUNF in the Human Dynamics Lab as one of the sensor-based data tools for your app.
Well, and what's interesting is I've been talking about veterans courts. The vets coming back out, and I have some knowledge and experience since I have, my oldest son is law grad and has been through that process, and my daughter-in-law. They're coming back in with these incredible skills and no jobs. And they understand in many respects they need to come back and be valued. And so we have other people who are coming out with all these issues and problems and need projects to work on. So there was a lot of cross-reference and an opportunity. And I know that Senator Webb, when he was there for Virginia, understood that nexus. And Tim Kaine understands that nexus. Yes. And I would say any of the leaders of the Second Chance Act understood that if you use strategic dollars that are not categorical, give us some flexibility, and then we data prove how we use those non-categorical dollars to change the economic outcomes. Now, there's a whole model there that goes together, and that has to do with putting people back to work in service jobs, leadership skills, and these folks who need to go to work. One of the most important things we did this last couple of years was we had this big garden. We had an empty lot. We created what we called a lasagna garden. Fed 5,000 pounds of food was going out of there, and every Saturday 100 people showed up to work in the garden, including all of our folks. And they would come and they would get to prove how hard they would work. They would meet people. They just had a place to go. So as a part of our reentry program is to create pro-social activities and programs. Pensacola, Casey Rogers, who runs the reentry court in Pensacola, has a phenomenal garden that she runs. Dolly G they have a diversion upfront program, because what our hope is we get to a point where we're really doing evidence-based sentencing. So right up front, we're able to make better decisions early on and use our resources in a more strategic way. But what I would tell you from a standpoint of making decisions, federal judges have the authority to do this at the back end. Because up front, a prosecutor decides who gets to get in those programs. At the back end, they're all coming out, they're under the jurisdiction of the judges.
Interesting.
So we built our system at the back end because you can't just ask a system to business pop up. You have to build, there's a demand and a need. And so we've been building the back-end system to move to the front. And what I will tell you is all the model that we're building up at the back end for the highest risk offenders using the most expensive resource, a federal prison bed, is built on the strategies that we use for children at risk of abuse and neglect in the family-centered, holistic, wraparound service model. And wouldn't it be nice if we're working both ends towards the middle where we have a different outcome with our resources and our data?
Wow.
So thank you for asking. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I'm just saying,